Anywhere you go, you belong.
Hey everyone, Chef Nick Peters Bond here, and this is Commanding Your Kitchen. On today's episode, this is part 2 in my 5-part series of my Hell's Kitchen finale menu, made accessible to you guys at home. So on today's episode, I'm going to be making a chili and coffee rubbed New York strip with some roasted parsnips, a red wine and red grape reduction, as well as some roasted oyster and maitake mushrooms. Obviously this dish looks a little bit different than it does in Hell's Kitchen. Someone's not screaming over my shoulder, there's no time crunch, there's not a live studio audience, go figure. It's just me in my home, so this is a lot more relaxing experience. I can hear my daughter running around upstairs getting ready for bed. It's a little different. But it's a little different in terms of the ingredients as well. You know, I used venison on the show, I had cocoa nibs and all these really nice ingredients that were readily available for me on the show, which is amazing. I think the goal of this channel is to really just make restaurant quality meals at home and have them be a little more accessible. So you can make a Hell's Kitchen restaurant style meal at home without breaking the bank, without having hour-long prep process, without all these extravagant ingredients. You can still get the same flavor profile for a little bit more inexpensive and with some more accessible ingredients. And I'm really excited to share it with you. So the prep for this dish isn't necessarily overly complicated. It's fairly easy. The one thing that I want to talk about is parsnips. I love parsnips. If you know any of my menus or know my restaurant experience, I always include parsnips on a menu or the menu, especially in winter when they're in season. It's the sweeter cousin of a potato mashed with a carrot, but it's white. It just, honestly, it's starchy, it's creamy, it's a little bit sweet, a little bit citrusy. It's really the perfect vehicle for a lot of starchy sides that people can make. You know, this is a perfect substitute for mashed potatoes. Today we're gonna roast these, but you could easily do these mashed. You could do half potato, half parsnip. You could do a puree. If you're gonna do a puree like I did in my last video, follow the exact same steps. Just take instead of taking your English peas like we did in the last recipe, you just have to cut up some parsnips a little bit smaller and then follow the same method and use the blender as well. That really is just what a puree is. It's pretty simple, but I feel like since we did do that last week, I want to switch it up a little bit this week. Maybe not everyone has a blender or has a high-powered blender like mine. I have a Vitamix, obviously, from Hell's Kitchen, and that allows me to basically blend everything I want. It's the best blender I've ever used. And nothing else compares. So if you have access to a Vitamix, please feel free to make a puree if you wanted to. It makes great soups, yada, yada, yada. This is not an ad for Vitamix. I just really love the product. So I'm just cutting these on the bias. As you can see, it's just fairly thin, maybe half an inch on the bias. Okay, so after I finished cutting up my parsnips, I just put them in a small bowl and I toss them with a little bit of olive oil, salt, pepper, and then some dried thyme. That's my favorite herb is thyme. It's really versatile. It can be used on, you know, vegetables, fish, meats. It's just really great. And so I love that sort of like citrusy herbal vibe that it gives the parsnips. They play really well with each other. So I'm just gonna roast these at 400 degrees for about like a half an hour. And that will really just give us that really nice caramelized color without making them too crispy, because we are going to take some parsnips that we made and air fry these into chips. That's my little like home riff on, you know, a fancy garnish for a restaurant style meal. I would always tend to do something crispy or something with a crunch on all my dishes, because I think texture is really important, not only flavor balance, but also textural balance. So those will be awesome with this. All right, so I'm just spreading out my parsnips right now. Spread them out evenly on your baking sheet. And while my oven preheats, I'm gonna move on. All right, let's talk mushrooms for a little bit. I do love mushrooms. Obviously, they're in a lot of my dishes. These two types of mushrooms in particular I love. This is a maitake mushroom. It's kind of crazy looking. And this is an oyster mushroom. You know, they get their name because some people say they have a light oyster flavor. I don't know if that's true, but it also kind of looks like one, allegedly. That's how it got its name. So with these, if you can buy these at most grocery stores, I've gotten them pretty much everywhere, Market Basket, Whole Foods, Stop and Shop, wherever you may have, they probably have these types of mushrooms. They come in little clusters like this. And so what I do is I just take off the bottom end. You'll see how that's obviously the root end of it. And I kind of just pick apart the mushrooms. And if they're huge, I just peel them right in half. These would be great in an air fryer. I'm gonna sear these today like I have in the past videos, which includes, you know, garlic, thyme, all that sort of yummy stuff that I've done in my last video. You can check out that video if you'd like. I can link that below. If you don't have access to this type of mushroom, cremini mushrooms are fine. It's like a baby portobello or something like that. I think you need a mushroom with a lot of flavor to hold up to this dish. If you just use a white button mushroom, it might not be as successful in terms of the flavor profile, but by all means, obviously you can still use that. I just like the texture and the flavor that these mushrooms give. It's kind of really an earthy dish. So you can either save these stems for a stock or just discard them, whatever you want to do. I'm probably just going to throw mine out, but I have in the past used stuff like that for stocks. All right, and the maitakes are very similar and pretty much the same thing. It's like it's got a crazy top, and then there's the stem. I'm going to pick that off, or slice that off, I should say. And then these literally, as you can see, they just come right apart. Just break them off in little clusters. Again, not too huge because you want them to cook at the same time, but I do like that like big piece of like roasted, crunchy, like earthy mushroom with this dish. It just really is amazing. And I think if, again, don't feel like you have to use these mushrooms, but I highly suggest it. Okay, so for those mushrooms, what I'm going to do is the same thing we have in the past. I'm going to get some a pan heated up with a little bit of oil. Vegetable oil is fine. Add some garlic, shallots, thyme, all that good stuff in there. And then we'll regroup, and I will show you how to make the yummy coffee chili cocoa rub for our steak. So as you can probably hear, I have my oyster mushrooms and shiitake mushrooms searing in a pan, just like we did last time in our last video with the mushrooms. I have them a little bit of veggie oil. It got pretty hot. You want it to be just almost smoke point, and you want to drop those mushrooms in. Mushrooms carry a lot of water, so don't be afraid to have the pan be a little higher than usual. Okay, so while those sear, I'm going to start doing our rub for our steaks. This rub will be enough for both of these steaks. So I'm going to take 2 teaspoons of cocoa powder. Literally any, run-of-the-mill cocoa powder is fine. I'm going to take 2 teaspoons of ground coffee. This pairs obviously really well with chocolate, and it's a really nice addition to the rub. Put that aside. Of course, we need 2 really big pinches of salt, probably 2 teaspoons at least. I'm going to throw in some. I'm going to mimic that dried thyme in the mushrooms just to kind of carry over that flavor. So I'm going to do a little palmful, maybe about a teaspoon. All these exact measurements will be on my Patreon as well. As always, if you don't know what Patreon is, basically it's a page where fans can go and they can support their favorite chefs or whoever it may be. And I have my, behind the scenes pictures, extra pictures, and also the exact amounts for something like this on there. That's some paprika, probably equal amounts of that as the coffee. And then I'm going to add in some chili powder, same thing, probably about 2 teaspoons. Use up the rest of this bottle, plus a little. There you go. And then a decent amount of black pepper. I prefer freshly cracked. I don't necessarily love table pepper that you can find at the store already ground. It's just really not the same. All right. So I can hear those mushrooms starting to quiet down a little bit. That means they're probably ready to be stirred, and add in the rest of our, shallots, garlic, and thyme into that. I'm just mixing around the rub, and then we are going to rub our steaks down. I maybe suggest taking your steaks out at least a half an hour before cooking them. I think I mentioned that previously. Let them come to room temperature. You don't want to cook a really, really cold steak in a hot pan. It'll just wouldn't cook evenly. So I'm just going to rub these down. You're probably thinking that seems like an aggressively amount of seasoning, but these steaks are pretty big. They're about 1 pound each. So you're going to want to get all sides, the fat cap, everything, just like in our last video. And that was our wedge salad video. So if you're interested in seeing a fancy wedge salad with some seared steak, we do a really yummy all-purpose rub there. This I obviously wouldn't say is all-purpose, although I think this could be great for obviously venison like I did in Hell's Kitchen, or you could do maybe some chicken. All right, so I'm just generously putting that all over. And you're gonna wanna use pretty much almost all of this because these steaks are huge. All right. So I'm gonna clean up a bit and let these steaks rest for about 10 minutes with that rub on there. All right, as with a lot of my dishes, timing is pretty crucial, especially ones that I did on Hell's Kitchen. Everything kind of had to be done at the same time. So while our mushrooms are finishing searing. I have a cast iron pan being heated up behind me on medium high while our steaks rest. I'm now going to slice these red grapes in half. If you don't like red grapes, obviously there's green grapes you could use instead of this. You don't have to use grapes at all. You know, adding some roasted garlic to the sauce instead, or it just would change the flavor profile a little bit. Caramelized onions would be fine as well. I just think that if you're looking to be at home as a home cook to like push your boundaries in terms of your flavor profiles, I highly suggest using the grapes. I think there's just something harmonious about, you know, the coffee rub, the red wine, obviously grapes and red wine, that's what they're made from. Those pair really well together. And kind of all those earthy flavors just really go really well together with a red meat, like a venison, or you could do a bison or something like that. Tenderloin, you don't have to use a strip, but yeah. So I just slice those in half. On the show, I use these raw, but I think today I'm going to make a pan sauce. Once the steak comes out, I'm going to deglaze with our beef stock, our red wine, add these in, and really finish the sauce with a nice pat of butter and make it really nice and glazed. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring you guys in closer to the stove so you can see how I make the sauce, sear the steaks, and we're gonna throw these little parsnip strands, which I just use a peeler for these. It's maybe half of a parsnip, and we're gonna throw those in the air fryer with a little bit of Pam on top, just to get them crispy. All right, guys, it's about to get really noisy up in here. I have my air fryer going. That's preheating because I'm gonna do my parsnips chips in there. As you can see, look at that amazing color of like the garlic and the mushrooms are just beautifully caramelized. Mushrooms cooked this way, you'll never want to cook mushroom another way. So those are gonna sit in the back and rest for now. I've had this cast iron preheating for about 10 minutes on low just because I wanted to get it start to warm up, and I'm gonna increase the temperature to about medium high like I said before. You're gonna want a little bit of neutral oil, not a ton. I'm using a vegetable oil. If you wanted to use something else, you totally could. I just think that vegetable oil, neutral oil, has like a high. You could use grapeseed oil or avocado oil, just something with a high smoke point so it's not gonna burn or, you know, ruin the flavor of your steaks. All right, so get our New York strip. You can see it's been rubbed. It looks amazing. And that's the sound you want. Strip for my husband, bone-in ribeye for me. It's how it always is. So while these cook, I'm going to throw my parsnips into the air fryer and cue some music so that way you can enjoy the lovely sizzling in the pan. Right, so the parsnips are in the oven. As you can see, they're roasting up nicely. If you wanted to make the puree for this dish, please refer to my last video when I made a pea puree. You could do the same thing, or you can make mashed parsnips, and that could be great as well. Today I'm just choosing to roast them. So there are options for you if you wanted to do something a little bit different. So my air fryer has been preheated. I just added in my parsnip peels as well as a little bit of Pam. And as always, you're gonna wanna season. I'm gonna just do a little bit of salt on these. They don't really need much. They have a really nice natural flavor. Put those back in, and I'm gonna say maybe, let's do 380 for, let's start with 7 minutes, and then we can always come back and add more time. That's the beauty of an air fryer. To take these steaks out of the pan to rest. As you can see now that all the sides have this like really nice crispy exterior. The char is there, the crust is there from that rub. I'm gonna let these rest for about 10 minutes before I slice them. And in the meantime, turn this pan back on low, medium low. There's a little bit of oil in there, but that's totally okay. That's gonna help start our sauce. I'm going to take our grapes and add those in, and let those kind of saute a little bit in that extra kind of like the beef fat in there, and that also probably has some remnants of that dry rub. Just start those, stir them around. Some char on these is okay, that you kind of want them to break down a little bit and help create the sauce. I am now going to add in, this is 3/4 of a cup of red wine. Any drinking wine will do. I know you hear that a lot probably on cooking shows, you know, as long as you can drink it, you can use it. Don't go crazy. I'm using 2 buck chuck from Trader Joe's. It's a great drinking wine. A little tip for you, it's really good. It's also really good for cooking, and it's inexpensive. So we're gonna let this red wine, all the alcohol cook off, and you'll know because the aroma won't be as pungent and the flavor won't be so sharp. It just kind of mellows out. And then we're gonna start adding in some beef stock. I think I'm only gonna add in maybe, I think I have about 1.5 cups here. I'll probably add in maybe 3/4 cup. We're gonna let this reduce by half and then add in some cold butter and then finish the sauce. As you can see, the parsnips have a really nice golden brown exterior. They're nice and seared from the oven. And then here our sauce, as you can see, is almost totally out of liquid. Not quite, but that's gonna be such a nice concentrated flavor. I'm now gonna add in 2 tablespoons of salted cold butter. And I turn the pan off. And this is literally almost kind of like on our beurre blanc video where I emulsified in the butter. This is kind of very similar. Obviously, there's not as much butter in this as there was in that video. And then these grapes are gonna be like little sponges. They're gonna have so much flavor and sweetness, but tartness and savoriness from that rub we had on there. And this will just be perfect for our steaks. It'll glaze them perfectly. You know, this is definitely a meal that if you really want to impress someone, this is something I always suggest doing. Is if someone likes red meat is always very impressive, especially when you cook it correctly. You know, I usually cook my steaks to an internal temperature of, 130, 135, and then let them rest for 5 to 10 minutes. That's like a really nice medium rare for me. I know a lot of people like to go a little more rare, more well done. Whatever your preference is, just make sure, I always tell people, have a meat thermometer. That seems to be the most accurate way, obviously, of temping your meat. So literally right before our eyes, you can see the butter is almost completely emulsified in. The sauce is thick. It's glossy, it's shiny. Literally finishing sauces with butter is one of my favorite things to do. All right, guys, our steak is resting. A little pro tip is that turn your oven off when your parsnips come out of the oven. And then while you're getting ready to plate, you can always keep your stuff warm in the oven with it off. It'll just keep your food warm until you're ready to plate. You can also throw one of your plates in the oven as well with the oven off just to keep it warm before you start plating. So on the show, I definitely did this dish a little differently than I'm gonna do it tonight. Hey, you can tell people this dish was Gordon Ramsay approved. So I'm gonna take my parsnips out of the oven, the warm oven, I should say. I'll put those right there. The color on those is unreal, and it just really increases that flavor. I have my sauce behind me, and I'm gonna pull out those mushrooms. And so obviously on TV, it looks a little crazy because everything's, the portions are smaller. That was kind of like a tasting menu. If you're making this at home, please feel free to literally use the entire steak, as much as someone can eat. All right, guys, that concludes today's video. I hope you learned something, a thing or two about plating at home, timing, restaurant quality meals. The main goal here is that I want you guys to feel comfortable doing things that I've done on TV or I've done at restaurants in the past and really make it accessible. So I hope you enjoyed today, and I hope it showed you that you can make substitutions without sacrificing presentation, flavor. This looks like a restaurant quality meal that you would get at any restaurant, so I really hope that you enjoyed it. As always, please subscribe to this channel if you do like content like this. This is part 2 of a part 5 series, so I'm excited to continue this series of my Hell's Kitchen finale menu. As always, please give this video a thumbs up and press the notification bells if you want to be notified when I post videos. I try to post videos every Thursday. Sometimes maybe I'll throw in an occasional video, but as always, guys, you got this.